61% of voters said they definitely will not be voting for Joe Biden. A new poll by Monmouth University finds while 42% of voters said they definitely will be voting for President Biden, but with over half saying the commander-in-chief will definitely not be getting their vote in 2024. That's up 5 points from July. Meanwhile, 48% of the respondents said the same for Donald Trump.
Oof. In the end, neither party frontrunner is all that popular. Just 37% are excited about Trump being the nominee. For Biden, it is 32%. Here to break down the state of the 2024 presidential race is political commentator and host of a Fresh Perspective podcast, Jeff Charles. Jeff, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on.
Those are some rough numbers, and notably even rougher for Joe Biden than they are for Donald Trump, with the bulk of Democrats saying that their primary concern with Joe Biden is, in fact, his age. Why do you think there is so much hesitation from the Democratic Party when it comes to the question of opening up the primary, or maybe even having Joe Biden step aside so that someone who is younger comes through?
Yeah, Brianna, I hear that question a lot from Democrats. A lot of Democrats are frustrated by the fact that they have this one guy who was going to be the nominee that was basically chosen for them. And I think maybe because they believe that Biden beat Trump in 2020, he can do it again. Maybe they think that this is the best way they can go. Maybe they don't think that they have anybody on the bench that could possibly do as good of a job in the election. I think it's a mistake, but it's really hard to kind of figure out what their reasoning is.
So it seems that there's a lot of distaste for either candidate, but fewer excitement for either candidate. Does this mean that there's a path for a third-party candidate to be successful, in your opinion, in 2024?
I don't think that there was going to be a chance that a third-party candidate could win, but I think that a third-party candidate could make a huge splash. I mean, I've seen multiple polls showing that about between 20 and 30% of people would consider a third-party candidate, especially if the match tends to be DeSantis versus Biden. You see the support for a third candidate going up in that instance. And I think people are getting fed up with the two-party system, and I think that the duopoly is taking a great hit here. So I do think that there's a very good opportunity for a libertarian candidate to make some waves.
So obviously, RFK Jr. has pre-announced that he plans to announce on October 9th that he will be running third party. He says the reason why is that the Democratic Party has not allowed him to compete sincerely, hasn't held debates, has changed the order of the primary schedule, et cetera. So in some ways, this primary has really become a referendum on the Democratic Party being maybe not so democratic in the first place. But when I hear you say a Ron DeSantis Joe Biden matchup is a kind of ideal ground for a third-party candidate, is that because we're seeing polls now which suggest that RFK Jr. would pull more from Donald Trump than Joe Biden? And if Donald Trump isn't in the race, then it's a potential boon for someone like RFK Jr.
Yeah, I think a lot of Trump's base is very loyal to him. So if he's not the nominee, they might be willing to consider a third-party candidate or an RFK Jr., and that could potentially hurt Republicans maybe a little bit more than Democrats. I mean, I've seen people argue both ways, but I tend to think that it'll probably hurt Republicans more than Democrats. What we don't know yet is how much is it really going to hurt either party for RFK Jr. to be in the race.
So it seems Donald Trump is pretty clearly in the lead for the GOP among the presidential hopefuls, but it does seem that there's a bit of a divide, right? We have the Democrats essentially quelling any sense of a competitive primary, and then we have the Republicans trying to have a viable candidate compete with Donald Trump, with him leading the pack of the GOP presidential hopefuls with really no sign of him slowing down. We've got a 538 tracker showing Trump standing at the top with just over 55% support, followed by Ron DeSantis, who's at a distant second, and then we've got Nikki Haley in third place.
According to Politico, the Republican National Committee will require candidates meet at a threshold to get on the debate stage. They will need to have 70,000 individual donors and hit 4% in either two national polls or one national poll and two polls from separate early states, which could force candidates polling in single digits like Tim Scott, Chris Christie, and Doug Burgum out of the 2024 race. So can we expect that some of these debate rules start to narrow down the GOP field? And are we going to get basically what the moderators asked in the last question of the last GOP debate? A sense that the party realizes they need to vote someone off the proverbial island if they want any chance of having someone contend with Donald Trump?
Yeah, I do think that's going to happen, Brianna. And, all the polling that's coming out right now is still very early, still very preliminary, but we can't ignore the lead that Trump has. As more candidates start to bow out, DeSantis is actually the favorite when it comes to people's second choice. So a lot of that support is going to go to DeSantis. So that gap between DeSantis and Trump is going to start closing. But even with the way the numbers are looking now, I don't think it's going to close enough. But, if something radical happens, if something crazy happens with Trump and his legal issues, there is a chance that DeSantis might come away with it.
What do you make of Glenn Youngkin's potential run? He seems to be a favorite by some very influential Republican donors that have previously propped up the DeSantis campaign. It seems that a key donor, Thomas Petterfy, has now shifted support more towards a Youngkin run. He plans on having a pretty large fundraiser, but has not indicated himself that he plans on running. Could you see Glenn Youngkin being that contender with Donald Trump, potentially reaching the 70,000 threshold before the next debate and being on that debate stage?
It's possible, Jessica, but I don't really see that happening. Even if Glenn Youngkin did want to jump in now, it's probably too late. I mean, I think there'd have to be a lot of anti-Trump sentiment to back him up, or maybe something, again, radical happening with Trump. But I think Glenn Youngkin is biding his time. I think that in the future, he will be a contender, but I don't see him trying to throw his hat in the ring right now.
And what do you make of the Gavin Newsom of it all? We're in this weird twilight zone where Gavin Newsom is going to be debating Ron DeSantis, even though Gavin Newsom isn't running for office in the Democratic primary or elsewhere, whereas Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. will not be getting the opportunity to debate Joe Biden, although RFK Jr. as a general election candidate might qualify to do exactly that. I mean, what do you think is going on with the way that Gavin Newsom is positioning himself right now?
Yeah, I think Gavin Newsom is doing what Glenn Youngkin is doing. I think he's biding his time. He's getting himself out there. He's trying to position himself as a rising superstar. I think if something happens with Biden, if he decides not to run, Gavin Newsom will definitely jump in. But I think right now he's still laying the groundwork. So that's what I see from Newsom right now. I mean, he's been trying to get himself out there even more, going back and forth with DeSantis, taking out billboards in Florida, Texas. So I do think that there's a method to his madness.
So it seems to me that there's a bit of a shift here from Democratic Party strategy. It seemed that during the midterms, there was a lot of fundraising and picking favorites in these primary races for Republicans, supporting more extreme candidates that they thought would lose against a Democrat in a general election. What do you think the strategy is for Gavin Newsom here, pretty much platforming Ron DeSantis by debating him, although Gavin Newsom is not a candidate for 2024? What do you make of that strategy coming from the Democratic camp?
Yeah, I think on Newsom's part, this is just a way for him to further establish himself. I mean, Ron DeSantis, is second to Trump in popularity on the right. So if the most popular Republican governor had been somebody different, Gavin Newsom would have gone after him. He's trying to go after the big dogs because he really wants to establish himself as somebody who can really take it to the Republicans on their own turf and compare his state's record to Florida's or Texas or other states as well. So I think this is all about Gavin Newsom trying to get to the next step in his political career.
And what about the wisdom of Ron DeSantis making this choice? I mean, on some level, Gavin Newsom is sort of like a proto-time-warped version of Joe Biden from 30 years ago. But, I mean, he also has the possibility of not coming off especially well in that debate. Say what you want about Gavin Newsom, but he's pretty poised and charismatic, which are not adjectives that have been used to describe Ron DeSantis. So do you think that this is a strategic boon for him?
Yeah, on DeSantis's part, this is very risky. I mean, we've seen some other debate performances where DeSantis doesn't do so well. And we've seen others where he holds his own, but he never really quite makes a splash. But I think for DeSantis, his campaign has been struggling so much that he almost needs something to kickstart it to get back on track. His numbers keep going down, even though he's still in second place. But if he turns out a winning performance against Gavin Newsome, that might endear him more to the base. So I think that that's kind of the strategy that they're going with there.
Yeah, I also just feel like maybe there's a little bit of potential Pied Piper vibes from Democrats. If you really do think that Ron DeSantis is easier to beat, or that he gets less and less popular the more people get to know him, giving him a platform to kind of come off as presidential and potentially come up a little bit in the polls against Donald Trump could be a kind of a Democratic strategy, although Pied Piper strategies haven't worked out for the Democratic Party in the past. It's how we got Trump. We'll see what happens. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.